Okay, The Patchwork Bride by Sandra Dallas, and this is chapter 6. I'm ready to see what's going on now. Nell had only two. Let me start again. Nell had only two outfits suitable for a party. She'd worn the cream-colored skirt and white blouse to the shindig at the Iversons' ranch, so she decided on the other, a red dress for the Macintosh event. She wanted to look nice, especially if Buddy was going to compare her to Alice McIntosh. She wondered why Lucy hadn't mentioned anything about the girl before then. Alice had not attended the affair at the Iversons'. She had been away at school in the East and then had gone to New York for the season. The party was a welcome home for her. "She's pretty, just like a china doll," Lucy said when Nell asked about Alice. "She's a getaway. Buddy wasn't the only cowboy she had on her string, but she liked him best, and I expect she thinks he's been waiting for her. Alice is quite a catch. Her father's a banker in Las Vegas and owns half the town. She and her brother will inherit it all. She usually gets what she wants." "Do you like her?" Nell asked. Lucy had been kneading dough in a wooden bowl and stopped and dusted the flour off her hands. "Like Alice McIntosh?" Lucy laughed. "I like her almost as much as that rattlesnake you killed with the skillet." "Really?" Nell was surprised. What's wrong with her?" "Her nose is so high up she'd drown in a rainstorm. Stuck up, vicious as a badger." Lucy began kneading the dough with a vengeance. "I'll tell you, Nell, if you fancy your cowpoke, you just might have a fight on your hands now that she's back. I've never mentioned her before because I didn't know she was coming home, and I hope she wasn't. I thought she'd marry some fellow back there, even if she doesn't want your Buddy. She's likely to go after him just to spite you." "I doubt she'll take much notice of me." "Oh, I wouldn't bet on it. My guess is she already knows everything there is to know about you. Don't underestimate her. The other girls around here know better than to tangle with her. She's not much liked by the women. She thinks she'd cut finer than frog hair." Lucy laughed again. "Men's another thing. They don't seem to notice how unpleasant a woman can be until it's too late. My advice is steer clear of Alice McIntosh and keep that cowboy away from her if you can." Lucy slapped the bread dough onto the table and began cutting off loaf-sized sections with the butcher knife and shoving them into pans. "But I don't suppose there's anybody that can keep a man away from Alice McIntosh once she's set her cap for him." The afternoon of the McIntosh party, Nell took extra care with her appearance. She washed her hair that morning, and before she dressed, she arranged it on top of her head and put rouge on her cheeks, which she knew were too tan from riding in the sun. She rouged her lips too, then glanced into the mirror and decided she looked like a chippy and rubbed off the color. Finally, she put on the red dress and asked Lucy to button the back. "How you going to ride being in this dress?" Lucy asked. Nell hadn't thought about that. She'd have to push the dress up to her waist if she rode astride, and that wouldn't do. "Best you ride in the carriage with Mr. Archer and me." Nell wanted to ride with Buddy, however, wanted to ride with him under that moon he'd promised, and she thought it was a good idea to show up at the party with him, just in case Alice claimed Buddy. So she changed into a divided skirt she had ordered from the wish book, pairing it with a white shirt and black boots. The skirt came well over her ankles, and Nell wasn't sure that was proper. Well above her ankles, and Nell wasn't sure that was proper. But Lucy told her she looked up to date, just like a picture in the ladies' magazine. Buddy's rich brown eyes lit up when he saw her, and he muttered, "Pretty as daybreak." He had shaved and put on a new flannel shirt. Nell judged from the fold lines still in the garment. He had polished his boots and brushed his hair and wore what must have been his good coat. Nell had never seen it before. He had knotted the red silk handkerchief around his neck, too. the one Nell had bought and sneaked into the bunkhouse and put into his trunk. He'd never mentioned it, perhaps because he didn't know it had come from her, but he looked handsome as a dime novel hero in his all finery, and Nell thought perhaps he'd wanted to impress her, or maybe it was Alice. Lucy looked at him, hands on her hips. "You got your low neck clothes on," she observed. "Well, you ought to wear your Sunday best if you're taking our Nell here to the party." "I sure wouldn't want her to be ashamed of me," he said. "I hear Alice is back," Lucy said. Nell looked away. She wished Lucy hadn't brought up Alice, but then maybe she ought to know what she was up against if she was up against Alice. Were they rivals? Buddy hadn't mentioned a word about Alice, and of course in the past weeks he'd acted as if he was stuck on Nell. Perhaps she'd just been a diversion. Maybe he had been stringing her along, hoping Alice would return. Nell didn't want to think he was like that, and she couldn't be sure. "So I hear. I hope she hasn't got too full of herself back at that school." "She was always too proud," Lucy replied. "Now, Miss Lucy, I don't know why you gals are so down on Miss Alice. I always thought she was mighty nice." He considered the remark. "Almost as nice as Miss Nell here." Nell hoped he meant that, but perhaps it was an afterthought. She felt unsure of herself and was apprehensive about meeting Alice. "Well, just don't get your spurs tangled, cowboy," Lucy said, as she and Nell went back into the house to carry out the pies. Lucy had baked a dried apple pie with raisins and cinnamon, while Nell had made her lemon meringue. It had received so many compliments at the Iverson party that Nell had baked it again, this time using even more egg whites so that meringue rose up like a blizzard on a mountain. Buddy helped Lucy mount Bean, then climbed onto his own horse. Nell thought to race him to the gate, but she found herself wondering if Alice would do that. Probably no, not if the girl had been in New York attending debutante parties. Besides, Nell didn't want to arrive at the McIntosh sweaty and windblown. It was bad enough she wore a riding outfit instead of a party dress. "Have you seen Miss McIntosh since she came back from New York?" Nell asked as they trotted across the prairie side by side. It was the tail end of daylight, with no sign yet of a moon. The earth was brown, covered with sage and chasma and clumps of buffalo grass. They could see a long way off east, where there was nothing but a few cottonwoods to block the view. To the west, the mountains were a blur of blue in the darkening sky. A hawk flew high above them, then dropped suddenly as it spied a rabbit. As it rose, it clutched the animal in its talons and flew into the dying sun. Far off, the cattle were lowing, and Nell heard the rattle of a wagon, or perhaps Mr. Archer's carriage in the clear air, where sound travels for miles. The world seemed enormous to Nell. "Nope," Buddy answered. "I imagine you're old friends." "That's right." "Then I'm sure she'll be glad to see you." "Hope so." Buddy didn't seem inclined to talk, and Nell didn't want to sound nosy or worse, jealous. So she was silent as she rode beside him, the only sounds now the horses moving through the underbrush, crunching the sage, which sent up its sharp smell. They passed the remains of a wagon, its wheels broken, its bed sagging into the ground. Then Buddy asked, "You got anybody you're sweet on back in Kansas?" Nell turned to him in surprise. She almost said no, but something told her not to be so quick to dismiss the idea. She wasn't sure about Buddy and Alice. It might be a good thing if she thought he wasn't the only one on her string. "There's a fellow, Lane Phillips is his name, but I didn't." She shrugged and did not finish, and Buddy asked no more questions. As they approached Las Vegas, Buddy adjusted the handkerchief and said, "You didn't say anything about my neckwear." "It's handsome," Nell replied. "Funny thing it's showing up in my trunk the way it did. Kind of a present. I wonder who put it there. Maybe it was from somebody that admires me. Maybe. Nell couldn't quite bring herself to admit it. Or maybe from somebody thinking you needed some low neck clothes. You think so? He chuckled. Well, I sure do think that person. If I knew who it was, I'd give her a kiss and an old white handkerchief. Then maybe she'll tell you who she is. The two of them grinned at each other. Then suddenly Buddy reined in his horse and jumped off to pluck a dried yellow flower from her charisma bush. He presented it to Nell with a bow, and she tucked it into the buttonhole of her shirt. They arrived ahead of Lucy and Mr. Archer. The other Rockinay cowboys had not been invited, since this was a formal party in town, not like the event at the Iverson Ranch, which had been open to the cowhands as well as the ranchers. They rode past low mud-daubed buildings and fussy frame houses. Then Buddy reined in at a black iron fence in front of a large Victorian house with a tower and a mansard roof, a cast iron fountain in the yard. The house seemed overbuilt, and Nell preferred the Rockinay's ranch house with its soft adobe walls, which seemed at one with the earth. She found the McIntosh mansion too showy. Alice McIntosh was standing on the porch steps. She had to be Alice, Nell thought, because who else in New Mexico territory would be wearing a low-cut white satin gown with jet beading and a hothouse corsage pinned to her shoulder, with her blonde hair artfully arranged on top of her head and a complexion as pale as cream. Alice was the prettiest girl in Las Vegas, certainly prettier than Nell was with her tan face and sun-bleached hair, Nell thought. Who could blame Buddy for wanting to see her? Alice's face lit up as she spotted Buddy. She did not rush to meet him, but waited like royalty on the steps of the mansion for Buddy to dismount, tie his horse to the fence, and go to her, taking her hands. He seemed to have forgotten Nell, who dismounted on her own and walked up beside him. My dearest old friend, what a pleasure to greet you. Alice held on to Buddy's hands a little too long. Welcome home, Miss Alice. Miss Alice, indeed. We mean far too much to each other for such formality. Alice started to say more, but became aware of Nell, who was standing next to Buddy. Oh, do forgive me. I thought you were one of the hands dressed that way. This is Nell, Miss Lucy's niece, Buddy said. Oh, yes, I've heard the Rockinay had a new hired girl. How thoughtful of you to bring her along. Alice smiled to take the sting out of her words, but the insult was there all the same. Then, without releasing Buddy's hands, Alice asked Nell to excuse them because they had so much to talk about. The kitchen is over there, she told Nell with a wave of her hand. Buddy, Nell began. Alice cut her off. Buddy, she said. You call him Buddy? Why would you do that? That's the name of his horse. Alice laughed, a sound like the tinkling of bells. She tugged Buddy's arm and led him inside the house, and Nell heard her say again, Buddy, isn't that the oddest thing? Is she addled? Buddy didn't give Nell a backward glance as he went through the door. Nell stood frozen, humiliated, as she watched the other guests arrive. Although the women were not as finely dressed as Alice, none of them wore riding clothes, and Nell realized she should have put on the red dress, even if it meant riding with Lucy and Mr. Archer. She straightened the collar of her shirtwaist and touched the tiny charisma flower. It looked silly compared to the flower pinned to Alice's dress, but still, Nell wouldn't have traded corsages for anything. Nell stood by the steps and waited for her aunt and Mr. Archer. When the couple arrived, Lucy handed down the pies. I suppose for a party as fancy as this, we didn't have to bring anything, but I'd rather err on the side of being neighborly. I know where the kitchen is, Nell said. How's that? Lucy raised an eyebrow. Alice told me. Lucy laughed. I just bet she did. You crossed spurs with her already then. Where's your escort? He left me behind, she stamped her boot in frustration. Now you're acting the way she wants you to, and just girly enough to make Buddy think you're silly, Lucy warned. The two women walked through the front door and back to the kitchen, where Mrs. McIntosh was checking the food preparations. Unlike her daughter, she was plump and disheveled, and she fluttered about like a prairie chicken. When she saw Lucy, she threw up her hands. I should have taken you up on your offer to help. I thought Alice and me, she rolled her eyes as she mentioned her daughter. Alice spent more time getting dressed than she did in the kitchen, all to make an impression on that cowboy. Mildred, you haven't met my niece Nell, Lucy said quickly. No, but I sure heard about you. Nell looked confused. You know, those perfumed hankies, she laughed. What a trick. Well, I heard the cowboys admire that you can laugh at yourself. Now, which one of you made that momentous meringue pie? Nell did, Lucy said. I imagine it will be the first thing to go. She looked up and said, There she is now. Alice, look at this pie Lucy's niece baked. Ain't it a beauty? Alice leaned over the pie. If you like pie, she turned to Buddy. She was holding his hand. I made your favorite chocolate cake, dear. Alice led him to the dining room where the desserts were waiting. Pies and cakes and cobblers, chocolate pudding, lemon pudding, and what the cowboys call frog eye pudding, tapioca. Alice's mother shook her head and said in a low voice, That one can bake a chocolate cake about as well as I can ride a bronco. I should have sent her to cooking school instead of to that fancy Eastern female seminary. Still, she smiled as she glanced into the next room at her daughter. But I don't expect any cowboy to care how well she can cook. Not that cowboy, anyway. Mildred McIntosh apparently had not heard that Buddy had been riding out with Nell. She's a very beautiful girl, Nell said, determined to take Lucy's advice and not appear jealous. Yes, I thought she'd find a young man in the East, but she didn't. There must be something about cowboys, she grinned at Lucy. Me and you both know about that, don't we, Luce? Maybe Alice does, too. Mrs. McIntosh touched Nell's arm and said, I hope you'll be a friend to Alice. There's some that think she's too stuck on herself, but deep down, she's a nice girl. She added to herself, I hope she is. I shouldn't have come, Nell whispered to Lucy when Mrs. McIntosh turned to the stove. Maybe I should say I'm not feeling well and go on back home. Now, don't you try to alibi your way out of it. Nothing would please Alice more. You just stay here and enjoy yourself. Why, you'll turn out to be the belle of the ball. Nell looked down at her riding skirt and shook her head. Not with Alice McIntosh around. Nell stayed in the kitchen with Lucy and Mrs. McIntosh, dishing up food and taking it to the dining room table, which was as big as half a dozen bunkhouse beds shoved together. Alice came into the kitchen again and carried out the desserts, placing her cake at the front on the dessert table. Nell's pie was on the side. Buddy, standing with the men around the bottles Mr. McIntosh had set out, watched her. When the tables were loaded with food, Mrs. McIntosh rang a little bell, and everyone trooped into the dining room and picked up plates, china, not tin. Nell noted. The McIntoshes had enough china plates for dozens of guests. Alice, with Buddy in tow, led the others as they helped themselves to the food spread out before them. Now save some room for my cake, Alice said, moving to the dessert table. She cut a sizable piece of the chocolate cake and set it on Buddy's plate. As she did, Buddy stepped backwards and tripped, righting himself by grabbing hold of the table, pushing Nell's lemon meringue pie onto the floor. It landed, meringue side down. Oh, look what I've done. I've spoiled it, he said, searching for Nell. And when he spotted her, he gave a mournful look. You sure did, Lucy muttered, almost on purpose, looks like. Alice laughed. Oh, there's plenty more, and I'm sure it wasn't much anyway. She called to Nell. There's a rag in the kitchen to clean it up. Nell glared at her, but Alice only laughed and turned away, and mortified, Nell went into the kitchen for something to wipe up the spilled pie. Why would Buddy have done such a thing, she wondered, and was it really an accident? After she had cleaned up the mess, Nell didn't care to eat. Now I really am sick. I can find my way home by myself. You'll do no such thing, Lucy told her. Don't you dare let Alice McIntosh drive you away. And don't turn moody. You're going to stay and have a good time. And you'll dance every dance, even if you have to dance with me. The two had taken their plates to a nook in one of the parlors. Lucy glanced at a man nearby, then said, "Why, Owen, you haven't met our Nell. Owen McIntosh is Alice's brother." Owen smiled. "I was wondering who the girl was who refused to ride a horse all gussied up in a satin dress." He bowed a little. "I saw her from the window, and I would be honored to claim the first dance with her." He stood and held out his arms. "I think I hear the musicians now. Would you do me the honor, unless you want some of my sister's wretched cake?" Lucy shoved at Nell, who stood and took Owen's arm. "I would be pleased," she said, but she wasn't. She would rather dance with Buddy, although she allowed Owen to lead her upstairs to the ballroom. Owen was a good dancer, but he was only one of the men who claimed Nell. As soon as the dance ended, another man took her arm, and when that dance was finished, Owen was back again. Once Buddy stepped up and asked her to dance, but as soon as he did, Alice said, "Why, I believe I promised you this one." She smiled at Nell. "Honestly, you don't think we ought to have dance cards? I just can't keep all the men straight," she pouted as she added to Buddy, "Of course, you'd fill up my card and wouldn't let anyone else dance with me." About midnight, Lucy told Nell that she and Mr. Archer were leaving. "You can come with us if you're tired," she said, glancing at Buddy, who was dancing with Alice again. "Might be safer since it looks like snow." Buddy saw them, however, and left Alice to say it was time he too went home. "That is, if you're ready, Miss Nell." "I can ride home with Lucy," she said. Buddy frowned. "I invited you, and I'll take you home. Wouldn't be right not to." He was firm. "Oh, you can't leave already," Alice said, but Buddy told her he had chores in the morning. "Maybe we can go riding." "I thought you didn't like to ride," Buddy said. Alice linked her arm through his. "I do with you. Perhaps we can invite Owen and Nellie, is it?" "Nell," Nell told her. "If you can get away from the kitchen," Alice added. They said their goodbyes, and Buddy helped Nell mount Bean. Then, instead of following the carriage on the road to the ranch, he led Nell through town and took off across the high plains, just as flakes of snow began to fall. They floated down, leaving patches of white on the sage and chestnut. After a mile, Buddy slowed his horse, and Nell came up beside him. "Did you have a good time?" he asked. "You sure were pirating around with Owen McIntosh." Nell flared. "I wasn't fooling around with anybody." "He's cultist. Doesn't know a thing that's useful. He's been off to college in the East," Buddy said. "So has Alice. It's different with a girl." "And why's that?" Buddy thought that over and didn't reply. "I just wanted to warn you. Don't go thinking he's anything special." "Not like Alice?" "He's all but engaged to a girl in New York or someplace like that, Alice told me." "I'm not out to marry him. I just wanted somebody to dance with, since the fellow who brought me to the party was busy with another girl." There, she had said it. Nell wasn't sure she should have, but she was hurt. Buddy had treated her shabbily. Her eyes watered, and she wiped them with the sleeve of her jacket. She had been so foolish. How could a hired girl dressed in a rough-riding costume think to compete against Alice McIntosh with her satin dress and skin as pale as the snowflakes? No wonder Nell could hardly keep from crying. She turned away so that Buddy wouldn't see her tears. Buddy reined in his horse and stared at her. The moon he had promised wasn't visible, but it sent just enough light through the snow that he could see her face. "You think I went over there to see Alice?" "Looks like it to me, but what do I care? You're free to do anything you like. Only next time don't invite me to go with you." Nell tossed her head and kicked Bean, but Buddy grabbed her reins. "I didn't have any choice. I tried to eat supper with you, but you were in the kitchen, and Alice kept a hold of me. I couldn't shake her, and that's the truth. Every time I tried to dance with you, you were with Owen, and then Alice would tell me I'd promised that dance to her. It just all got too confusing." "Is that why you knocked over my pie?" "It was an accident. Didn't look like it to me." Buddy turned away and then looked back at Nell. "It wasn't." "You did it on purpose. I thought you were done with practical jokes." Her voice was choked, and she dabbed at her eyes again. This was supposed to have been a wonderful evening with Buddy, but it hadn't turned out that way. Even the moon he had promised was obscured. Nell grabbed her reins from Buddy and was ready to ride off. "Course I did it on purpose. Maybe you didn't see her shake salt all over the top of it." Nell stared at him, a frown on her face. "What?" Buddy nodded. "Anybody ate your pie was in for a bad surprise. I already spoiled your reputation with those handkerchiefs. I didn't want folks talking you couldn't bake a pie." "Is that the truth? You did that for me?" "Well, sure I did. Alice had got it in for you, and I don't know why." Nell blinked. Was it possible he really didn't know why Alice would go after her? Then Buddy said, "I wouldn't do anything to hurt you. I got feelings aplenty for you, Nell. I like you awful well." It was the first time he hadn't called her Miss Nell. "And I was kind of hoping you had them for me. I was thinking that was why you bought me this red handkerchief." Nell couldn't say anything. "Am I right?" She stared at him in the moonlight, brushing off the flakes of snow that had fallen on her hair. Why hadn't she brought a scarf or a hat? "I said if I found out who gave it to me, I'd give her a kiss and a white handkerchief. Well, I lied about that. I'm keeping the handkerchief." Buddy reached over and touched her hair, which was damp from the snow. Then he took off his big white hat. As he leaned over to put it on Nell's head, he kissed her, harder and longer this time. The end of chapter 6.